with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Brent.
Great, thank you, Holly. Well, good morning, everybody. With today's presentation, I've got just a few slides here beginning to give a brief overview of Beck, and then I'll dive right into the topic for today. So I've been with Beck for 15 years, and during that time, I've worn several different hats by choice. If you are attending and you know me already, then it's likely you know me from my role with the services team at Beck Technology. But before jumping into Beck Tech, I was involved in various construction project management roles and architecture and pre-construction roles within our firm. In the role that I'm speaking to you from this morning, I'm speaking to you from as the Beck Group's DESTINI Applications Director. So in this role, I'm responsible for the implementation and deployment of DESTINI Estimator and re-implementation of Profiler, training and supporting of both products, defining workflows, best practices, data management, content, that kind of thing. So let me do a quick obligatory company overview in case folks are interested in what is Beck, who is Beck, and what do we do, that kind of thing. First, Beck is an integrated firm. We have architects, contractors, technology experts. We are who we are today because of some decisions made by our leadership team about 20 years ago or more. And we've been working hard towards this moment since around 1996. And we continue to learn and relearn and work towards what we call excellence in integration. And have enjoyed the ride. It's been an interesting ride over the last 15 years for me, I know, and probably for the firm as well. We have offices in Atlanta, Austin, Dallas, Denver, Fort Worth, and in Tampa. We also have a Mexico City office. To give a better picture of who we are and what do we do, I thought I'd just tell a quick story rather than go through a bunch of slides about what we've done and that kind of thing. About 18 years ago, a guy named Jerry Cooper from our firm came to one of my senior classes at Texas A&M and gave a presentation on integration. He came in and he gave this, he painted this really cool picture of a firm who was very actively and consciously trying to be innovative and do things differently. He talked a lot about the company's first true integrated project, which was called Pinnacle Park. It was a development and design and build and technology integrated effort for our firm. It was one of the very first things we did, short of building furniture together as a team building exercise. It was one of our first major projects. I was not involved in that, but he came to us and spoke about it, and it became the poster child for our company for a successful project for at least 10 years after that, and until the rest of us all got tired of hearing about it. So eventually that project faded away, and we've moved on and done some other great projects. But when I heard that story being told to my class from Jerry Cooper, I was hooked in terms of what Beck was doing with integration and technology and merging architecture and construction disciplines and cross-training and the whole works. So I say that to say that Beck is a great company, and this thing called integration is what we get really excited about. We do a lot of things really well, like the slide shows, but we're at our best when we're doing integrated work. And so that culture of integration permeates throughout our business and obviously has overflowed into the technology side and affects our individual disciplines. So with that, hopefully that's a good enough overview of the company. And let me get into today's presentation. So our presentation is about implementing and deployment on the DESTINI Estimator. I hope that, A, I hope it's not too dry, and B, I hope that it gives you some insight into if you're considering a potential implementation plan for your firm, your organization, what that might look like, and a path that we've decided to go down that you could possibly choose to do yourself as well. For background information, I wanted you to know that we have been a Timberline shop for 10+ years. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say that as an organization, we have people who have put a lot of blood, sweat and treasure into Timberline. And a lot of people have invested a lot of their time and parts of their career and expertise into that system. And I think it would be fair to say that it has served us well over the past 10 plus years. We have over 275 assemblies, almost all were custom built. And I don't know how many line items, probably north of 5,000 and less than maybe 10,000, somewhere in that ballpark. And we have 40 estimators across all of our offices that have used or are using Timberline. Also, I wanted to say too that before we committed to making this implementation, we started over a year ago with discussions, planning, testing pilot projects. We sought buy-in from pre-con leadership. We did surveys on our existing assemblies to find out the state and status and usability of those, and what improvements would we make if we decided to launch into something like this. So it wasn't, it definitely hasn't been just the flip of a switch. I think it's important to note. So why the change though? If we've invested so much in Timberline, why the change? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think some of them are probably pretty obvious, but there's some that are probably more nuanced, and I would want to take a second to go through those and really explain those. Really, I think the biggest reason, and hopefully this comes across very sincerely because that's what I intend it to be, is that the timing, our team and leadership is right. You know, in my 15 years with Beck, I've seen a lot of people come and go through the organization through just natural attrition in a firm. And we've been blessed with a lot of good leaders over the years. But the current leadership in our firm, and more specifically within our pre-construction teams, is the best I think we've had to date. And there's just this forward-looking, continuous improvement culture that resonates through our teams that can be pointed to our leadership. And then the folks within our, this speaks to them as well. Our pre-con teams are comprised of, you know, talented people who are capable of being successful with a change like this. So all that to say that, you know, I believe we are preparing for really a new era of pre-construction and estimating. Those of us who've been in the industry for at least 10 to 15 years or more know that we've seen this change coming down the tracks for years. We've never known how long it's going to take to get here, but I definitely can think back to the later 2000s, mid 2000s, when we knew that eventually this change was going to come down the pike. You know, back when Revit was picking up momentum and firms were trying to make the decision of should we move to Revit or should we stay with Auto? You know, all those conversations that happened in the mid 2000s, and for some much later. And I think I'm speaking to model-based estimating for the most part. Model-based estimating has had its spurts and starts, and is enjoying some success today in some firms with different applications. But we know as a group that the industry is definitely headed in this direction. It's just a matter of time. And we know there's a lot of caveats and asterisks that we can put by that comment and talk about, are we ready? Or architects ready to draw models the way we need them? You know, all that kind of stuff can be up for discussion, but we know it's coming. And so as a firm, we knew that Estimator, DESTINI Estimator, above the other products, were preparing itself to take on that challenge, which I would say is the next big step. Another reason for making this change is that as an integrated firm, our teams are really working hard to build workflows around target value design, and the suite itself, DESTINI Suite, including Profiler and Estimator, really supports this process. So those are kind of the soft reasons, but very valid in my opinion. There are some real just down-to-earth practical reasons. Continuity from Profiler as a conceptual estimating tool and moving that project downstream into Estimator is obviously a very valuable benefit. I remember the discussions way back when we were having to convert that to Timberline data and start over in Timberline. So there's obviously a financial impact by reducing, you know, if Estimator can fully replace other tools, then there's some savings in licensing and software costs and that kind of thing. easy to use and provide value to project teams. I think that once my presentation hopefully will show, once we get beyond implementing within pre-con, we're going to be looking to roll this out to project teams, because I've already heard from several project managers who would like to have access to this tool just to build, change orders and do some rough estimating for their customers and clients, that kind of thing. So, and then last but not least, this is an obvious one, hopefully for everyone. It's a Beck product. We should be using our own products, in my personal opinion. That's my personal opinion. But it's a great product, and we should be using it. So I stumbled onto this quote while doing some other research for some other things, but there is definitely truth into this statement. For many years, Beck invested heavily into that newest shiny object that came out of the market. I can think back to numerous tools that we have piloted and used to some degree. And, a lot of us argued about the expense and waste of these pilot efforts and venturing time and money into these projects. And others can argue that, it's the cost of being an innovative firm. And then secondly, certainly out of these pilot projects, new discoveries were made and progress was made along the way. So, but I think the quote is very appropriate for where we are today. We know a change is coming. We can wait until it's here and then deal with it, or we can begin preparing our teams and our tools and our workflows for that process, that change. Okay, the implementation overview. I wanted to touch on various parts and pieces that we're engaging, or I should say our major touch points for our implementation. Those boil down to training, the deployment of the tool, or how we're going to phase the deployment of the tool. We've got a lot of data development that's got to happen. And then once you get that data developed, how do you manage and maintain that information? There's the output from the tool, deliverables, reports, there's support, and there's a couple other things we can talk about. So training, we have decided, is going to be site-based. It'll occur at each regional office. We've got a lot of people, 40 individuals to bring to one location. Doesn't make sense. It makes sense to take one trainer to each location, so that's pretty obvious. We talked about deploying this by project teams, or perhaps entire offices, depending on the size of the office and team. We've already jumped in. We've started with Dallas and Fort Worth teams. We did that as a whole, primarily because those teams are at different points of involvement in various projects, and it was our first time, so we wanted to kind of do an initial rollout on the training and see what needed to be tweaked and tuned for successive office training events, and learn from that exercise. So I'll speak to this later as a challenge, but obviously when you train everybody at one time, you've got the issue of retention. Training is definitely a perishable skill, so or the lessons learned are perishable. We're using a custom curriculum-based training. I made a conscious effort to take our standardized training material and customize it specifically to our data sets, so that it looks and feels like our data, and you don't have that stumbling block of, this isn't how we do this doesn't look like my data. Those commonly dealt with challenges. It requires, the training that we're deploying requires one full day commitment from the participant. We've broken that down into 2 half days. So we have a morning session on the first day and a morning session on the second session. And it just covers base functionality. So this is something that definitely would be up for discussion, I think, in your own firms and how you do this. But Estimator is an easier product to learn than Profiler. There's still a lot of information. There's still a lot of functionality that it can just become overwhelming, and you don't need to know it all to get the product started and get out of the starting blocks. So we have one trainer for all offices. That's me. I intend to have several follow-on sessions to focus on other content, advanced functionality, things like comparisons. And I'm going to talk about what the base training includes, so you'll get a peek at what that is. And then ultimately, when we're done, all the estimators will have gone through the training, and we have a migration phase to phase out projects that are currently using Timberline or other systems, and then get everybody on board with Estimators. Base functionality includes going over the GUI, the user interface, understanding this concept of grouping, filters, layouts. You know, one thing that people are probably sick and tired of me saying now, because I'm saying it so frequently, is grouping, filters, layouts. These concepts are pervasive throughout our application, and once you get your brain wrapped around how that works, then a lot of the application becomes much more intuitive. We go through how to create estimates both from scratch and from importing other data from other estimates. We go through how to add line items, assemblies. We spend a lot of time on managing the estimate. Once you've got content in the estimate, how do you change quantities? How do you change data? You know, all that kind of stuff. We go through 2D takeoff. That's probably second, right behind just getting into the system and learning how to create an estimate, is learning how to use 2D takeoff, because our hope is that this becomes our primary takeoff tool. And then how to prep standardized reports. So what it doesn't include, what we don't cover in base training, is estimate comparisons, dashboard views, 3D model takeoff, and what we call the Beck bid tab, which is well, for now, not for now, it is a dashboard. It was a separate Excel file that we have historically had to do bid management and that kind of thing. The schedule for our deployment was essentially 6 months. When we launched into this effort, we thought it was going to start in December. We actually didn't start till February for a number of reasons, all for the better. And so we're looking at 6 months from February. As I mentioned earlier, we've already started in Dallas, Fort Worth, and that's done. From a training standpoint, we're working through the implementation part of that and getting people onto the product. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of projects in Dallas that were started already and need to just finish in Timberline and move those projects out the door. We have 5 regional offices that we'll end up rolling out to, and we got a schedule for those. The first training happened in DFW in February, and then we had a 2-month intentional delay before we start the next office. That's to give me time to recognize our stumbling blocks and tweak and tune the training material based on what we learned. And we're learning a lot, and it's really good. We talked about by project teams versus offices, depending on the size. Ideally, I mean, I think this would be a Beck Technology stance as well. Ideally, you want to pick a team, a project team that's about to start, and have them just roll right into this. It's best not to do an entire office in hopes that when Joe finishes his project in June, he's going to be able to pick up this product and use it from where he started. That's just unlikely, but sometimes that's how the business works. So you gotta roll with what you got. And then I mentioned pre-con groups first, followed by project-based teams. So we have Beck University that deals with training for all employees, and once we get past the pre-con teams, we'll make this available to the rest of the organization via Beck University. We have a component of database development that has to occur, and we've chosen to do this simultaneously with the rollout. That has its advantages and challenges, both, but that's the way we decided to do it. We have basically begun with our baseline item content derived from our Timberline data. So that's data that we have curated and created and maintained over the years. And at a line item level, it's fantastic. So we've started there. We took a moment to revise and change some of our WBS properties and make those better, in our opinion, for what we're going to be using in Estimator. And then the assemblies is our biggest nut to crack. And we have decided to take an approach that I would call a crowdsourcing of the content. We've got estimators who have periodic downtime and have an interest or a passion behind this. And so they have, starting back in January, we had some data manager training classes and some assembly creation training classes, and got those folks involved in the development of the assemblies. And then I'll talk some more about that particular item here in a minute. And then our hope is that would get developed throughout the 6 months. So our hope is that by the end of 6 months, we're done with major content development. And as the later groups that get trained will benefit from the content that's being developed along the way. And then the DFW group had to suffer and was the guinea pig that didn't have assembly content to work with. So they've been good sports too. From a database deployment standpoint, I just want to talk about, there's a lot of different ways to handle database deployment at an enterprise level. And you definitely need some cooperation and collaboration from your IT teams. But we're using what I call a localized sandbox deployment from a corporate master copy, which is stored on the network. There's nothing preventing people from connecting to a master centralized database. I don't like that setup for a variety of reasons. One is performance and accessibility, but nothing is preventing you from technically doing that. We opted not to. So I'll talk about that in just a second with a picture. We have automated scripts that we back up the database on the network weekly, and then users have access to that backup at will. So they can download a current version of the database at will, today, tomorrow, right now, in 5 hours, whatever. So that's very accessible to them, and I like that. And then we haven't gotten into this, but there's going to be a second phase to implementation that deals with regionalization of our cost data right now. Basically, if you want to call it not regionalized, it's not. So we'll get into that as well. So here's a pretty picture, one of only a few today, I'm sorry, that deal with the structure of our database. So the image on the left represents our network share. It's got a DESTINI corporate master database on it. That's the lock and key version of our database. It's backed up through our IT backup systems every week. So it's fairly well protected, and generally speaking, nobody can access that and get into it and change data and that kind of thing. I mentioned we have a localized sandbox copy deployment strategy. So what happens is we have a script that the user can run. It grabs a current copy of the corporate master and installs it on their local machine under the name production database. And that becomes what everybody is supposed to be using within the organization for estimate development. It's got, as I mentioned, it's an at-will update. So you could have the moments, a moment ago, the latest update of data. And when we do make intentional updates, I send out an email saying, hey, we've got a new version of this. Run your script and grab the newest. At the same token, we create a second sandbox copy, and it's called Sandbox. And this is there for the user to develop custom content, or if they want to play, or if they want to explore and investigate what it's like to develop content, or they may have a need on a specific project that they need to develop content for. They can do that here. And then in one more slide, I'll give you the rest of that picture. From a database management standpoint, we have regional gatekeepers that are designated. They have access to the corporate master, and they can make global changes to unit cost or add assemblies or add line item content. From a maintenance standpoint, at a minimum, we do quarterly updates for unit prices as we hear from the subcontractor community and supplier community. But that's not the only kind of updates we do. We do regular content updates as needed. So what does that look like? When you've got people on the team who are experimenting or developing information in their sandbox, and they want, they feel like that's an important assembly and it works really well, and they want to move that to the corporate master, we have a group that I'll talk about here in a couple of slides that would review that content, test it, make sure it works, make sure it meets our standards, so to speak, and then that can get rolled into the corporate master from one of the gatekeepers that has access to it. And so then if that were to happen, then we would notify the group that a new database has been developed, and they would run the script, and that would be replacing whatever their current production database is on their local machine. So I'm pretty passionate about this. When people ask, when companies ask how to set up their databases, I'm pretty passionate about this particular setup. I think it gives a lot of flexibility. It creates a lot of opportunity for standardization of the data without being very restrictive to the user. And it doesn't create any really unnecessary hoops and hurdles for people to get over to use. It's also pretty easy for me to roll out when new users come online. From an output standpoint, this phase is really, we haven't gotten into this, to be honest. We haven't gotten into this very heavily at all. We've got some standard reports that work for now, but we're going to be going through a phase where we get together and talk about what do we want our standard reports to look like. When I say standard reports, from a Beck technology language, it's banded reports. From a general population language, that means crystal-like reports. We just don't have crystal-like. We don't have crystal reports. We use a system that's similar to it, though. And those are reports that I would say the average Joe, and that includes me, cannot create on their own. It's a challenging report designer that requires some advanced knowledge, and so we will customize those as we can do so when we get those defined. We have a custom bid tab that I mentioned earlier. This is nothing more than a dashboard now, which is exciting. It's an Excel-based tool that is imported into as a dashboard and is used for bid management and that kind of thing. And then we have dashboards, and everyone who's started looking into Estimator knows that the dashboards, I hope everyone knows that if you've been looking into Estimator, the dashboards represent a really unique opportunity for us as pre-con teams. We've got creative people. You know, people don't think estimators are creative, but we've got really creative estimators who are very knowledgeable in tools like Excel. And I'm excited about the potential that the dashboards are going to reveal to our organization. I'm excited to see what people do on their own and then bring back to the group and say, hey, this is a dashboard I've been using for a couple of weeks, and it really does X, Y, and Z very well. And then we'll see that and find the value in it very quickly and then roll that out. So it provides an opportunity for the average estimator to develop new content to meet their needs without having to pay $10,000 or something like that to generate a custom report. So hopefully I've said enough on that. Support, we've got training initially. We conduct weekly user group meetings. Once a week we get together, and that's open to anybody, but primarily the folks that are joining those meetings right now are those who have been trained and are looking to implement and get up to speed on Estimator. We cover, you know, what are the current challenges? We share tips and tricks. We talk about assembly. We review content, you know, all that kind of stuff. Beyond that, we have technical support. We have internal first level support, and then anything that needs second level or gets escalated is a phone call or an email or walk over to Beck Technology. We have an online, well, we use the online community from Beck Technology, and I'm excited to see our folks get more involved in that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to develop some supplemental training materials, some videos, content that can be accessed at will by the users. From a communication standpoint, you know, change management is all about communication and making sure people know where we're going and why we're going there and what we're doing about it and all that kind of stuff. So training provides a huge platform, a big podium for me to stand on and communicate what we're doing, why we're doing it. None of that would have been possible had we not had buy-in from the leadership level. So I'll talk about that too in just a minute. We've got our weekly user group meetings to keep the communication lines open and touch base as a group. Of course, anybody's free to email or call me during the week. And then I provide monthly leadership updates to our leadership group as to where we are with the implementation, what we're doing, what successes are we seeing, what challenges are we seeing. Okay, what are the known challenges? I mentioned this already. Training is perishable. So we knew it going into it that training the entire DFW office, somebody would forget how to do something. That's inevitable. But we needed to get the first stake in the ground, and that was the first stake in the ground. And so that's been done. And I will provide supplemental training as necessary. I'm already doing that, and that's fine. That's good for me, and it's good for the people that need training. One of the challenges is you know, I mentioned earlier that one of our key strengths and reasons for doing this is the people we've got in the pre-con teams now. We got very successful, talented, experienced estimators. We got people who recognize this change that's coming down the pipe and are excited about it. And those that aren't excited about it recognize that it's coming and are willing and able participants. And that's a pretty important piece as well. But they all come. One thing that has made us different is that we've got some new faces. We got a lot of new faces within our teams, and with that come experience and background in other tools, including MC Squared, Timberline, and Excel altogether. So just bringing people together that have diverse backgrounds and say, well, this is how I did it in MC Squared, or this is how I did it in WinEst, or whatever. You got to figure out a way to bring those people to the table and let them see help them see the value of what this tool is offering. Nothing different than anybody else has ever experienced, but it is a challenge. Estimating is personal. This is something that I've learned over the years being part of the services team and working with so many different groups and organizations and people. We would like to believe, I think, as estimators, that estimating is a pretty standardized process. You can define how it's supposed to work, but in the end, I find and have found working with different people, hundreds of different people all across the United States and beyond, that estimating is a very personalized process. Yes, when you are fit within a firm, you have to adapt that personality to some degree to what the firm expects, but still to that point, even within a firm, there's personal touches within estimating that make it unique to each person. So you got to deal with that. And that's usually that can be a positive, because obviously you learn how other people approach a problem. Estimators are passionate about process and workflow, so that kind of ties into the one above. But people have a certain way of doing things, and as creative as estimators can be, we're probably also the ones very guilty of this is the way I've done it for 10 years, and I don't really see a reason to change. Especially when I got a bid due next week, and you're trying to shove this new process down my throat. So that's an important thing to recognize, and just do your best as a firm or as a trainer, as an implementer, to work with that knowledge that this is something that's worked for 10 years for somebody, and you're trying to pull the rug out from underneath them. So you got to be compassionate and empathetic about that part of the process. And then my last comment on that is really that when you can prove the value of the tool to that person, or I should change that, when they see the value of the tool, this becomes a non-issue. So just like I've said before, I use Profiler for a lot of different things because I know it and it provides value to me. So when that switch is flipped for that individual, this becomes a non-issue. The last known challenge is just resistance, to change in general, to the loss of productivity during the ramp-up phase. We're committing at some level to dealing with some known hardships about, maybe the 2D takeoff doesn't do everything that on-screen takeoff does yet. And so we got some hardships there or something like that. You gotta deal with those. The ability to accept imperfections in the product. This is a in progress. This is a living product, and it's growing and changing every day. And it's not perfect right now. And I don't think anybody claims it is. And then the unknowns, which brings me to my next slide. I don't know what the unknown challenges are yet, but we're guaranteed to hit them. And so we have to deal with those as they come down the pipe as well. All right, I'm almost done in case you're getting antsy. So just the last two or three slides. Beyond implementation, as I mentioned earlier, I'm excited about the potential that lies in these tools, the ability to do variance analysis and compare estimates, the ability for any estimator within our firm to develop some really cool and valuable dashboard that benefits either our teams internally or benefits the owner in terms of how we view and present data. That's all to be seen, and that's when people get in the product and get comfortable with it and start exploring and experimenting, there's going to be some cool stuff that comes out of this. And I venture to say, as a community of users, there's going to be some really cool stuff that comes out of this in our estimator community, beyond and outside of Beck Group. So I'm excited to see what our users as a whole come up with some of the functionalities available in this product. Beyond that implementation, we got to figure out how to phase out existing software license and move people beyond the current projects, and then just training beyond pre-con teams. So one more quote just for fun. Murphy's Law applied to change management. Something's going to go wrong. I just don't know what it is yet. so I'll deal with it when I get there. We can plan all day long, and a plan is definitely good and necessary. Nothing's as easy as it looks. Build one assembly and you'll know what I'm talking about there. Everything takes longer than you think. Build one assembly and you'll know what I'm talking about there. And inside every large problem is a series of small problems struggling to get out. I love that. I got all these from this guy that's mentioned in the lower right corner. I love each one of these. Last two slides. One topic of debate is always, I think, within firms, should this be a top-down or a bottom-up approach? Well, I definitely have an opinion on that, but it's an opinion, so anyone is entitled to their own opinion. I think it has to be both. I have experienced personally what happens when you try to make it a bottoms-up only, and what happens when you make a top-down only approach. I think you have to come at something like this from both directions, or it's just not going to be successful. I think at a top-down level, there has to be some level of mandate that says this is the tool we're going to use, and we're going to do this, and everyone needs to get on board. Otherwise, you might not enjoy working here. I think the top-down example is creating the implementation schedule. 2-year implementation plan might not be acceptable to leadership, and I think it's their right to say that that's not acceptable. So helping to set boundaries about what's an acceptable implementation schedule. Obviously, standards and branding, anything related to risk, accuracy of content that the firm produces, all that's examples of things that have to be led from the top down. But from the bottom up standpoint, as a whole, if you don't have people that are excited about something like this, man, it's going to be a major uphill battle and probably ultimately won't be successful. So I in no way, shape, or form am writing off the value and the importance of having buy-in at every level below leadership. So if leadership has mandated it, it better be because they've gotten buy-in from a majority of the group of people that this is the right thing for this firm. The creation of new content, the exploration of things like dashboards and the comparison to all that can be examples of bottom-up implementation and leading by example, because this is the way I've done it on this project, and I found value and I shared it with you, and we as a group saw value in it and wanted to do it that way. So I think that's it. So I would open it up, or Holly, I'll toss it back to you, and if there's questions I need to address, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Brent. We do have several questions. If anyone else wants to type them in, feel free to. I'll go ahead and start with these. Is the corporate master database cloud-based, or can it be?
So I may reveal my ineptitude when it comes to IT things here. Cloud-based, I'm assuming you mean like on box.com. And the answer to that is no, although I don't see why it couldn't be. Cloud-based, yes, in that it's on the network. It's sitting somewhere out there on the network and not on my machine, so to speak. And so, really and truly, it's on the network for one reason and one reason only: to protect it. Well, maybe a couple of reasons: to protect it, to provide some level of security, and to make it accessible so that the script that we run can be automated, and Estimator Joe can run the script and grab a current copy of the database. I don't see why that couldn't happen on a cloud, maybe the box or something like that. But one thing we are not doing, I'll make this specifically clear, we're not, as a user, I'm not connecting to the local, I'm not connecting to the central database that's on the network or on box and using it as a production database connection. I would advocate against that, although I'm sure it's technically possible.
Okay. And then can the reports easily be made to resemble Timberline reports or other reports people are used to?
Custom reports, which again, I'll reinforce this just so that when we talk together as a firm, we know what we're talking about. Banded reports is our terminology for crystal-like reports. Crystal-like reports is what I would call analogous to anything that Timberline is producing or NC Squared is producing. And yes, we can replicate that as a custom report. We would have to build that as a service because it's not an easy thing to do, and it requires our R&D team resources to build those reports. There are people out there that can build crystal reports, so I'm not trying to make this inaccessible, but I can't do it, and I know most people that I know as estimators can't do it either. So it's just not it's an advanced skill is what I would say.
Okay. And then is the Timberline database that Beck has exported and imported easily, or what does that process look like?
Well, we have, I don't know the answer to the question as whether you can export the content. We have all of our line item content, both in Excel and in Timberline. So because we've been using Profiler for 10 plus years, when we first started out on this endeavor, we had content that was replicated in both systems. So I'm gonna assume that if you have custom data that you've built in Timberline, that you can export that out of Timberline into an Excel file. Once you get the data in Excel, it can be imported into Data Manager.
Okay, and then as far as accessing past files, what does that look like for Beck? Will y'all keep a few licenses? I know you mentioned phasing out Timberline. Will you keep a few licenses of Timberline to access those past files? And are old files importable into Estimator? I believe you touched on that.
So yes to the first question. We don't know the time frame on that yet, and we haven't made any kind of commitment that we're going to phase out Timberline by X date. We recognize we have a lot of big projects, multi-million-dollar projects that are Timberline based. We're going to have to continue to use that system for a while, and so that's understandable. And to your point, I think what that looks like is, yes, retaining a license for some period of time, maybe phasing out the paid support and going with just a license for some period of time. What was the second part of that question?
It just talked about the old files being importable.
Oh, yeah. Again, if you can get the data to Excel, you can import it as a new estimate into Estimator. And so I know that's possible. So the answer to that question is yes.
Great. And it looks like we'll go ahead and wrap up the questions. If any do come in, I will reach out via email. Wanted to just thank Brent for presenting and also let you all know that we will be at Advancing Building Estimation on May 22nd doing a pre-conference workshop on why we need change, and we would love you all to attend there. I will be sending out the recording hopefully today, if not early tomorrow, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks to everyone.